Jonathan Reed stood in the expansive living room of his opulent penthouse, the skyline of Manhattan sprawling majestically beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun dipped low, casting golden rays that danced across the polished marble floors, but the warmth of the light did little to touch the chill that had settled in his heart. He watched as Caroline, his wife of 7 years, flitted about the apartment, her attention focused on her phone rather than him. The glow from the device illuminated her face, but rather than seeing the woman he had fallen in love with, he felt a growing distance that felt insurmountable. "Caroline," he began, his voice soft yet firm, "can we talk?" She glanced up, her blue eyes sparkling but lacking the depth he once adored. "Can it wait, John? I have a meeting in 10 minutes. She returned to her screen, quickly typing, her fingers flying with a dexterity that seemed foreign to him. Jonathan's heart sank. "It's always a meeting, isn't it? I miss you." The admission hung in the air, heavy and unacknowledged. She sighed, rolling her eyes slightly. "I know, but I'm busy. You have to understand, this is important for my career." "Important for your career," he echoed, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "What about us, Caroline? When was the last time we had dinner together without work interrupting? Or talked about something other than your projects?" Caroline snapped her phone shut, the sound slicing through the tension. "I'm doing this for us, Jonathan. You think I enjoy being away all the time? You have no idea what it's like balancing everything." "Balancing everything? It feels like you're balancing your life without me in it. I feel like a ghost in my own home." The silence that followed felt deafening. Jonathan's pulse raced as he watched her expression shift from annoyance to something softer, perhaps guilt. But just as quickly, it vanished. "You know I love you, right? Just give me some space. I'll make it up to you." With that, she retreated to their bedroom, leaving Jonathan alone, the weight of her absence pressing heavily on his chest. He slumped into a plush armchair, gazing out at the city that never slept, feeling more disconnected than ever from the person who had once filled his life with joy and laughter. As the days turned into weeks, the chasm between them widened. Caroline's late nights became a routine, her phone calls increasingly secretive. Jonathan found himself wandering through their home, a lavish prison filled with memories of better times, yet devoid of warmth. He needed to know why she had become a stranger in his own life, and as he mulled over his growing suspicions, an idea began to take shape within him. In the dead of night, Jonathan scribbled plans on a notepad, the ink flowing as freely as his thoughts. What if he could see her life from a different perspective? What if he could understand the woman he loved by stepping into her world, however unconventional it might be? The thought both excited and terrified him. The following morning, he made a decision. He would disguise himself and work as a doorman in their luxury apartment building, where he could observe Caroline's interactions without her knowledge. It was a risky move, but desperation fueled his resolve. He imagined himself as John, a simple doorman blending in with the background, able to witness the life Caroline led when he wasn't around. Jonathan spent the next few days preparing. He visited a costume shop in the city, purchasing a doorman's uniform that felt oddly foreign against his skin. The fabric was crisp, the insignia representing the building's elite status shining brightly. He practiced the role in front of the mirror, adjusting his posture, practicing the proper way to greet residents with a polite nod and a firm handshake. "Good morning, sir," he rehearsed to his reflection, imagining the faces of their high society neighbors. "Welcome home, ma'am." On his first day, Jonathan arrived early, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The lobby was bustling, a flurry of activity as residents came and went, each absorbed in their own worlds. He slipped into the role with awkward determination, greeting the residents with a forced smile that felt unnatural. "Morning, John," called out Mrs. Larkin, a silver-haired widow with a penchant for gossip. "You're new here, aren't you?" "Just started today, ma'am," he replied, clenching his jaw to suppress the anxiety bubbling within. "Well, welcome. You'll soon learn that this place is like a soap opera," she chuckled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Jonathan nodded, though he felt a pang of dread at the thought of the stories he might uncover. He kept his focus on the entrance, waiting for Caroline. When she finally arrived, it was as if time slowed. She stepped out of the sleek black car, her silhouette framed by the sunlight, her designer clothes clinging to her form. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. She was breathtaking, and yet, he felt a twinge of sadness. The woman he admired from afar was slipping away, lost in a whirlwind of ambition and secrets. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed," he said, consciously keeping his voice steady, employing the same tone he had practiced. "Good morning, John." she replied with a bright smile, her eyes sparkling as she rushed past him, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I hope you're settling in well. Yes, ma'am. Just getting the hang of it, he said, suppressing the urge to reach out to her. Watching her depart, he felt a mix of pride and sorrow. He had to remind himself that he was now an observer in her life, a silent witness to the world she inhabited. As the day progressed, Jonathan encountered a myriad of residents, exchanging pleasantries and learning snippets about their lives. Each conversation was a piece of a puzzle, revealing the intricate social dynamics of their building. But it was Caroline's interactions that intrigued him the most. He caught glimpses of her laughter echoing through the lobby as she chatted with neighbors, her charm effortlessly disarming them. Yet, as he continued to observe, a gnawing feeling crept into his mind. Was this the woman he thought he knew? The laughter felt different, the way she engaged with others felt rehearsed, as if she were playing a role. Hey, new guy, everything all right? Asked Tom, the building's maintenance worker, breaking Jonathan from his reverie. Yeah, just getting used to everything, Jonathan replied, forcing a smile. You'll see. This place can be a little much. Just keep your head down, and you'll be fine. Tom chuckled, patting Jonathan on the back before wandering off. As evening approached, Jonathan's heart raced with anticipation. Each moment spent as John deepened his understanding of a woman he loved, yet it also fueled his concerns. He had begun to uncover a tapestry of relationships and events that hinted at a life Caroline had woven in his absence, and he was determined to discover the truth. As he clocked out for the day, the weight of his disguise felt heavier than ever. He was not just a doorman, he was a man on a mission to peel back the layers of his wife's life, hoping to reclaim the connection that had faded like the dying light of day. He took a deep breath and stepped into the bustling New York night, the city alive with possibilities. Little did he know, the journey ahead would unravel secrets that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the masks people wear. Jonathan stood at the entrance of the luxury apartment building, the crisp morning air wrapping around him like a familiar cloak, yet it felt foreign in his new role as John the doorman. The grandeur of the structure loomed above him, its polished facade glinting in the sunlight. He watched as residents trickled in and out, each absorbed in their own lives, their faces a blend of indifference and entitlement. Today was another day, another chance to observe Caroline from a distance. He had seen her leave at this hour every day, her presence a burst of warmth against the sterile backdrop of the building. But Jonathan felt a tension in the air, a sense of something lurking just beyond the surface of her bright smile. As he stood at his post, Jonathan spotted Caroline approaching, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor of the lobby. She wore a sleek designer dress that hugged her curves perfectly, exuding confidence and elegance. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing her face, which was lit up with a smile. She greeted the residents with a bright good morning. As she passed, her eyes sparkling with a vivacity that Jonathan struggled to reconcile with the woman he had been arguing with at home. Morning, Caroline, he said, forcing a smile that felt more strained than genuine. She paused, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than usual, as if she was trying to place him. Oh, John, how's your day going? She asked, her voice light and cheerful. Just started, but it's shaping up nicely, he replied, his heart racing. He watched her closely, searching for any hint of the distance he had felt growing between them. Yet, she appeared completely at ease, her demeanor reflecting a life he had been absent from. As she walked past him, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. Here she was, effortlessly charming everyone around her, while he, in his disguise, felt like a ghost haunting his own life. His mind churned with questions. Who was she during those long hours he spent away? Who was she when she was not Jonathan's wife, but simply Caroline? Later that same afternoon, Jonathan's unease intensified. He had just finished his lunch, a cold sandwich hastily consumed behind the doorman's desk, when he noticed Caroline again. This time, she was standing outside the building with a man Jonathan hadn't seen before. He was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that seemed to put Caroline at ease. They stood close, their body language intimate, laughter spilling from their conversation like sunlight through the trees. Jonathan's heart raced as he watched them. He could feel a storm of emotions brewing inside him, jealousy, confusion, and a hint of betrayal. What was going on? Was she seeing someone else? He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white as he fought the urge to storm out there and confront them. Instead, he kept his distance, hidden behind the facade of his uniform, a silent observer to a scene that felt like it was tearing his heart apart. Excuse me, John. A resident interrupted his thoughts, snapping him back to reality. An elderly woman was approaching him with her small dog, her expression one of concern. "Could you help me with my packages?" "Of course, Mrs. Henderson," he replied, forcing himself to focus on her as he helped her with the parcels she struggled to carry. But his mind remained anchored on Caroline and the man outside, their laughter echoing in his ears long after they had parted ways. That night, as the city lights twinkled outside the large windows of their penthouse, Jonathan sat at the dining table, the remnants of dinner untouched. He could hear Caroline moving about in the kitchen, her presence filling the space with warmth, yet a coldness settled in his chest. "Caroline," he called, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "Yes," she replied, emerging from the kitchen, a smile adorning her face. "Dinner was great, wasn't it? I tried that new recipe you mentioned." "It was," he agreed, though he couldn't muster the enthusiasm. "Can we talk about your day?" Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "Of course, what do you want to know?" Jonathan hesitated, the words swirling in his mind like a storm. "You seemed happy today. You were outside with someone. Who was he?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Caroline's expression shifted, her brows knitting together in confusion. "Oh, that was just Michael from the charity. He's been helping me with some projects. We were discussing a new initiative." "Right," Jonathan replied, skepticism creeping into his voice. "You looked quite comfortable with him. Is there something I should know?" "Jonathan, really," she said, her tone shifting to one of annoyance. "You're being ridiculous. Michael is just a colleague. You're being jealous over nothing?" "Nothing," he echoed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You were laughing with him, looking happy. I don't even recognize you anymore, Caroline." She crossed her arms, her patience waning. "You're overreacting. I have my own life, my own interests. Just because you're not around doesn't mean I'm sitting here waiting for you to come home." "Then what are you doing?" he countered, his voice rising. "I feel like I'm in the dark about everything you do outside of this apartment." "Maybe that's because you choose to be in the dark," she shot back, her own frustration spilling over. "You're the one who decided to play doorman instead of engaging with me. Maybe you should start asking questions instead of jumping to conclusions." Jonathan took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had hoped for a moment of connection, a chance to bridge the growing divide between them. Instead, they were spiraling further apart. "I'm just trying to understand you, Caroline." "Understanding?" she scoffed. "You think wearing a uniform and watching me from a distance gives you insight into my life? You're only seeing a fraction of it." As her words hung in the air, Jonathan felt the weight of her accusations settle over him. She was right, he had been watching instead of engaging. But how could he engage when he felt so estranged from the woman he loved? "Maybe I should just go back to being who I was before," he murmured, the fight leaving his voice. "Maybe I shouldn't have tried to see your world at all." "Jonathan," she said softly, her tone shifting as she stepped closer, "that's not what I want. I want you to be part of my life. Just because you're doing this doesn't mean you have to pull away from me." But he felt the distance between them, like an invisible wall that had grown thicker with each passing moment. "I just need time to figure things out," he finally admitted, a hint of defeat in his voice. Jonathan turned away, the conversation hanging heavily over him. As he contemplated the day's revelations, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something far more complex than he had anticipated. The man outside, Caroline's laughter, her dismissive tone. Everything felt like pieces of a puzzle he was struggling to put together. He resolved to dig deeper into her life, to understand the woman he had married and the secrets she might be keeping. He couldn't remain a passive observer any longer. It was time to uncover the truths that had been hidden in plain sight. Jonathan Reed stood at his post, clad in the crisp, dark uniform that transformed him from a self-made millionaire into John, the doorman. As the sun dipped below the skyline of New York City, casting long shadows across the marble lobby, he felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Today would be different. He had pieced together snippets of Caroline's day-to-day activities, and they had begun to form a mosaic that puzzled him. He had noticed that Caroline left their penthouse at the same time every Wednesday, dressed in a tailored outfit that seemed too formal for a casual outing. The first time he had seen her leave, her smile had been radiant, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that it was a mask, a facade she wore for the world. He had seen her interact with other residents, cheerful, warm, always the perfect socialite, but behind that smile, he sensed something deeper, something hidden. "Good evening, John," a resident greeted him as she strolled past, her heels clicking against the polished floor. You're always so cheerful. How do you manage it? Jonathan forced a smile, his mind racing. Just doing my job, ma'am. Enjoy your evening. He watched her disappear through the entrance, then turned his attention back to the elevator. Caroline would be down any moment. His heart raced as he thought about the charity she supposedly volunteered at. He had done some research and found out that it was a highly regarded organization, but something didn't sit right. Caroline had never mentioned it in detail, and he couldn't recall her ever discussing her charitable endeavors with the same passion she once had for their shared interests. As the elevator doors opened, Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Caroline stepped out, looking every bit the part of the poised socialite. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her fitted blazer accentuated her figure. She glanced around, her eyes sparkling, but he felt the distance between them grow larger. "Evening, Caroline," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "John," she exclaimed, her surprise genuine. "You're here late. Everything all right?" "Just keeping my eyes on the building," he replied, his heart racing. "You look lovely. Where are you headed?" "Oh, just a meeting at the charity," she said breezily, waving her hand dismissively. "You know how it is, lots to discuss this time of year." "Right," he said, forcing a smile. "They must appreciate your dedication." She nodded, but Jonathan noticed her gaze drift toward the door as if she were eager to leave. "Well, I won't keep you," he added, trying to mask the unease creeping into his thoughts. "Have a great evening." As she walked away, Jonathan felt an impulse to follow her, to see exactly where these meetings took her. He had spent hours piecing together fragments of her life, and now he was determined to uncover the truth. He waited for a moment, then slipped out of the building behind her, careful not to be seen. The city was alive with energy as he trailed her, weaving through the bustling streets. Caroline walked with purpose, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. He kept a safe distance, the growing darkness offering him some cover. They turned onto a side street, leading to a lavish building adorned with twinkling lights. His heart raced as he stepped into the shadows, watching her approach the entrance. Just as she reached for the door, another figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with a confident stride. Jonathan's stomach knotted as he recognized him. It was the same man he had seen her with outside their apartment just days earlier. "Carolina, you made it," the man said, his voice warm and inviting. Jonathan felt a pang of jealousy grip him as he watched Caroline smile at the man, her demeanor suddenly shifting to one of ease and familiarity. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Alex," she replied, her voice light and carefree. "Did you get my message?" Jonathan's heart raced as he strained to hear more. "Yes, I did. I'm glad we're finally able to discuss the plans. It's crucial we get this right." As they entered the building, he could only catch fragments of their conversation. Arrangements and commitments floated through the air like whispers, and with each word, Jonathan felt his heart sink further. Doubt began to coil around his mind like a serpent. What kind of arrangements were they discussing? Was this all part of a greater scheme that he had been oblivious to? His instincts screamed at him to confront her, to demand answers right then and there, but fear held him back. What if he was misinterpreting everything? What if he was just a man overreacting to his wife's social life? Still, the gnawing unease wouldn't let go. The gala hall was extravagant, filled with glimmering chandeliers and a crowd of elegantly dressed guests. Jonathan watched from a distance as Caroline and Alex moved through the throng, surrounded by laughter and conversation. He felt like an outsider, peering into a world that was once familiar but now felt alien. "John, why are you standing there looking like a deer caught in headlights?" A voice called, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was one of the other doormen, a jovial man named Frank, who approached him with a bemused expression. "You're supposed to be greeting guests, not lurking in the shadows." Jonathan forced a chuckle, though the knot in his stomach remained. "Just observing," he said, his eyes still fixed on Caroline. Frank followed his gaze, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Ah, the beautiful lady in the black dress. You've got good taste, my friend. But don't let her charm you too much. They can be tricky, those socialites." "Yeah, I've heard," Jonathan muttered, unable to tear his eyes away from Caroline. Her laughter rang out like music, and the way she leaned closer to Alex sent a fresh wave of insecurity crashing over him. "Just remember, John, it's easy to get lost in this world. Keep your eyes open," Frank advised before moving off to tend to another guest. As the evening wore on, Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He felt like a ghost, wandering through a life that once felt so real. Caroline's laughter echoed in his ears, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. Then, without warning, a realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He didn't even know who Caroline was anymore. The woman he had married, the woman he thought he understood, had become a stranger. Steeling himself, Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped further into the gala, determined to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He had to find out what was happening behind the smiles, behind the carefully curated lives they led. He had to know who Caroline really was, and who he had become in the process. With each step, the weight of his disguise felt heavier, and the lines between love and betrayal began to blur in the shimmering lights of the gala. Jonathan Reed was ready to unveil the truth, but he had no idea how deep the secrets would run or what he would ultimately discover about the woman he thought he knew so well. Jonathan's heart raced as he stood at the entrance of the lavish gala, the glow of chandeliers casting a golden hue over the crowd. He had slipped through the throng of attendees, still clad in the doorman's uniform that had become both his disguise and his prison. The laughter and clinking of champagne glasses filled the air, but all he could hear was the thunderous beat of his own pulse. He had never intended for this confrontation to happen in such a public setting, but the sight of Caroline laughing with that man had sent him spiraling into a whirlwind of emotions. "Caroline," he called out, his voice cutting through the music and chatter like a knife. Heads turned, and the laughter faded as the crowd sensed the tension. Caroline's head snapped toward him, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "Jonathan," she stammered, her face paling as she took a step back. "What are you doing here?" He stepped closer, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and hurt. "I'm here to confront you." "Who is he, Caroline? What's going on between you two?" She looked around, a flicker of panic crossing her features as she registered the gaze of the onlookers. "Not here, Jonathan. Please, let's talk somewhere else," she pleaded, her voice low but urgent. "No. I want answers now." Jonathan's voice rose, drawing even more attention. "I've seen you with him. The way you laugh, the way you smile. What kind of marriage do we have if you're out there flirting with someone else?" Caroline's expression morphed from shock to anger. "Flirting? Is that what you think this is? You've been so wrapped up in your world, Jonathan, that you don't even know me anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the hurt beneath her anger. "Then tell me who he is," Jonathan demanded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "You can't expect me to believe that you're just friends." She crossed her arms, stepping back as if to create distance between them, even in this crowd. "You need to understand something. I've been working on something important, and you have no idea how dangerous it is." "Dangerous?" Jonathan echoed incredulously. "What are you talking about? Is that why you've been so distant? Because you're involved with some secretive project, or some secretive man?" Caroline's eyes flashed with frustration. "You don't get it. I've been trying to protect you. I've been involved in something that could endanger us both, and I didn't want to drag you into it." Jonathan scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "So your solution is to sneak around behind my back? To keep me in the dark?" "I didn't want to keep you in the dark," she snapped, her voice rising again. "I wanted to shield you from this. You think I'm just out there living a separate life, but it's not like that at all. You've been so focused on your business, your wealth, that you've forgotten who I am." He searched her eyes, looking for some sign of remorse or understanding, but all he saw was a fierce resolve. "So what? You think this is okay? Running off to galas, meeting with this stranger, while I'm left wondering what's going on?" "Jonathan, please," she implored, her voice softening. "You need to listen to me. I've been working with a non-profit organization. I'm trying to expose corruption that ties back to your business. This man, his name is David, and he's been helping me." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. "Corruption? What are you talking about? Are you saying my business is involved in something illegal?" "It's more complicated than that, and I didn't want you to be a part of it. I thought I could handle it on my own," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's dangerous, and I didn't want you to get hurt." Jonathan felt the ground shift beneath him as he processed her words. "And you thought the best way to protect me was to lie to me? To sneak around? You could have told me, Caroline. We could have faced this together. I didn't want to drag you into this mess," she cried, her frustration boiling over. "You think I'm having an affair? I'm trying to save people's lives here, Jonathan. This is about more than just us." As their voices rose, The guests around them whispered and stared, some taking out their phones to capture the scene. Jonathan's face burned with humiliation, but the anger swirling within him drowned out the embarrassment. "So you've been lying to me for weeks, and I'm supposed to feel sorry for you?" "It's not about pity. It's about survival," she insisted, her voice steadying. "I didn't want to put you in danger. You don't know who you're dealing with. The people I'm up against, they're powerful and ruthless." Jonathan's heart sank as he realized the depth of her words. "And you think I'm just going to stand here and accept that? You've kept me in the dark, Caroline. You've hidden this entire part of your life from me." "I did it for you," she shouted, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because I love you. But you don't see me anymore. You see only the facade, the wife of a millionaire, and I'm so much more than that. I've been trying to make a difference, and I thought I could do it without you ever knowing." He shook his head, his own emotions swirling in a chaotic tempest. "You think this makes sense? You think I'd be okay with you risking everything because you're trying to save the world?" "I never said it was easy," she countered, her voice trembling. "But this is my passion, Jonathan. I need to do this. And I thought you'd understand." Jonathan took a step back, his mind racing. "Understand? You've been thriving in this secret life while I've been left here to wonder if I'm losing my mind." Caroline's face fell, the fight draining from her as she looked at him, vulnerable and exposed. "I never wanted it to be like this. I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I couldn't find the right moment. I didn't want to burden you." "Burden me?" he echoed, disbelief lacing his words. "You think being honest with your husband is a burden? You think I wouldn't want to support you?" "I didn't want you to have to choose between your business and me," she admitted, the tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to put you in a position where you'd have to pick a side." But Jonathan felt the walls closing in around him. "And now? Now that you've been caught? What do we do now?" The silence that followed was heavy, filled with a cacophony of emotions: betrayal, confusion, love, and despair. Caroline took a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know. I need to think." Before he could respond, she turned abruptly, weaving through the crowd, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Jonathan stood frozen, his mind racing as he felt the world around him blur into insignificance. The laughter and music faded into the background, replaced by the turmoil of his heart. He had come to confront her, to demand answers, but now he was left grappling with a truth he had never anticipated. The woman he loved was not just a distant figure in his life. She was a fighter, embroiled in a battle he had been blissfully unaware of. "Caroline," he called out, instinctively reaching for her, but she was already lost in the sea of partygoers, her figure disappearing into the throng. The realization struck him like a blow. He had pushed her away when all he had wanted was to understand. As Jonathan stood in the midst of the gala, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. He felt like an outsider looking in on a life that had once been filled with love and shared dreams. Now it was a tangled web of secrets and misunderstandings, and he was left questioning everything he thought he knew about Caroline and himself. In the days following the explosive confrontation at the gala, Jonathan Reed found himself trapped in a whirlwind of confusion and regret. The penthouse, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and shared dreams, felt more like a prison. The opulence that surrounded him now seemed hollow, a facade that masked the growing chasm between him and his wife Caroline. He sat at the edge of the grand dining table, his fingers tracing the fine grain of the mahogany surface, reflecting on the choices that had brought him to this moment. The echoes of their argument reverberated in his mind, her words slicing through his pride like a knife. "You never truly saw me," she had said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. He had opened the door to doubt and disdain with his accusations, and in doing so, he had pushed away the very person he wanted to understand. Each day blurred into the next as he donned the doorman's uniform, greeting residents with a forced smile, while inside, he grappled with the weight of his decisions. His heart ached with the realization that he had been so consumed by his own insecurities that he had overlooked the complexities of Caroline's life. The secrets she harbored were not merely betrayals but layers of a woman who had been living in the shadows of his expectations. "Good morning, John," a resident chirped, breaking his reverie. It was Mrs. Green, a sprightly woman in her 70s, who always seemed to know everyone's business. Her eyes sparkled with warmth as she passed him, but Jonathan barely registered her presence. "Morning, Mrs. Green," he mumbled, forcing a smile. As she walked away, he couldn't help but wonder if she had ever seen the true Caroline. Did anyone see her? The thought gnawed at him. He felt like an outsider in his own life, peering through the glass of a reality he had once thought he understood. That evening, as he stood watch outside the building, the city lights twinkled like stars in the night sky, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt inside. He could feel the weight of his pride, heavy and suffocating, keeping him from reaching out to Caroline. She had sent him a text earlier that day, a simple message that read, "Can we talk?" But he had left it unanswered, his heart torn between wanting to hear her voice and fearing the truth she might reveal. Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Jonathan's heart raced as he recognized the man he had seen with Caroline, the mysterious stranger whose presence had ignited his jealousy and suspicion. The man approached, his demeanor relaxed but purposeful. "Evening, John," he said, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "I see you're keeping busy." Jonathan straightened, annoyance flaring at the interruption. "What do you want?" "Easy there, big guy. I'm just here to talk," he replied, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Name's Alex, by the way." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, unsure of what to make of this encounter. "What do you know about Caroline?" Alex's expression shifted, the smirk fading as he regarded Jonathan with a more serious tone. "I know more than you think. But I'm not here to stir the pot. I just want to help you understand her." "Help me understand?" Jonathan echoed, incredulous. "Why would you help me?" "Because I've seen what she does," Alex said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I think you deserve to know. She's not who you think she is." Jonathan's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Alex stepped closer, scanning the street as if ensuring they were alone. "Caroline is involved in something big. She's been working undercover with a non-profit. It's not just charity work, it's about exposing corruption, people who would do anything to protect their interests." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jonathan felt a mix of disbelief and curiosity surging within him. "What are you talking about? Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she's trying to protect you," Alex replied, his tone earnest. "The deeper she gets into this, the more dangerous it becomes. If you knew well, it could put you both at risk." Jonathan took a step back, grappling with the revelations. "This doesn't make any sense. Why would she keep this from me?" "Because you're a businessman, Jonathan. You've built your empire on trust, but this world is different. You're not just her husband, you're also a target if you get caught up in this." Jonathan felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting. The image he had of Caroline, a woman lost in their luxurious life, was crumbling. What exactly has she been doing? "She's been gathering evidence, connecting dots that lead back to some high-profile players, people who have ties to your business." The weight of Alex's words pressed heavily on Jonathan's chest. He felt a surge of anger mixed with a bizarre sense of admiration for Caroline. "And you're telling me this because?" "I have my reasons," Alex said, his gaze unwavering. "But more importantly, you need to talk to her. She needs you on her side, not as an enemy. If you confront her without understanding the whole picture, you might lose her for good." Jonathan's mind raced. He had spent so much time blinded by jealousy and assumptions that he had failed to see the woman he had married. The woman who was fighting battles he knew nothing about. "Where is she now?" "Probably at the charity gala tonight," Alex replied, a note of urgency creeping into his voice. "But Jonathan, you need to tread carefully. You're stepping into a storm." With that, Alex turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan standing in the doorway, his heart pounding. He felt a desperate need to find Caroline, to hear her side of the story, to understand the truth behind her secret of life. The cold night air embraced him as he stepped out into the street, determination overriding his earlier hesitation. He had to confront Caroline, not with accusations but with an open heart. He needed to listen, truly listen, to the woman he had married, to the woman who had been fighting in the shadows. With every step toward the gala, Jonathan's mind raced with questions. What would he say? How could he apologize for the way he had treated her? And what if the truth was more dangerous than he could imagine? As he approached the venue, the sounds of laughter and music spilled out into the night. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. But he knew he had to push through the doubt. He had to find Caroline, to show her that he was ready to be the partner she needed, a partner who would stand by her side, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, ready to face the tumultuous path ahead, ready to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of their lives. The evening air was thick with tension as Jonathan stood there, his heart racing while he faced the mysterious man who had unexpectedly wandered into his life. The man, whose name Jonathan still didn't know, leaned casually against the polished marble of the lobby, his expression a mixture of amusement and challenge. Jonathan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of conversation that had led him here. "What do you mean she's working undercover?" Jonathan demanded, his voice barely above a whisper, laden with disbelief. The man's casual demeanor irked him, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the life of the woman Jonathan loved. "Look, I know this is shocking, but you have to understand, Caroline is not who you think she is," the man replied, his tone shifting to something more serious. "She's been doing this for a while now. Exposing corruption. It's dangerous work, and she's been trying to protect you from it." Jonathan felt a surge of emotions, anger, confusion, and a flicker of pride. "Protect me? By lying to me? By sneaking around behind my back?" He stepped closer, his mind racing with images of Caroline's secretive meetings, her late nights, the way her smile seemed to hold secrets she wouldn't share. "You think I want to live in the dark?" "It's not about that," the man replied, his voice firm. "It's about keeping you safe. The people she's dealing with are not just corrupt, they're dangerous. They have ties to your business, Jonathan. That's why she's been cautious." "Cautious?" Jonathan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "She's been evasive. I thought I was losing her to someone else, to infidelity." "Infidelity?" The man laughed, but it was devoid of humor. "You think that's what this is about? You think she's getting cozy with another man when she's risking her life to uncover the truth?" Before Jonathan could retort, the familiar figure of Caroline emerged from the elevator, her expression shifting from surprise to alarm as her gaze darted between the two men. "Jonathan?" she asked, confusion etched across her face. "What's going on?" "Just a little chat about your hobbies," Jonathan said, his voice laced with bitterness. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, even as he struggled to understand her motives. "Care to explain why you've been keeping secrets from me?" "Secrets?" Caroline echoed, her brow furrowing. "Jonathan, I can explain. Can you?" He interrupted, his frustration bubbling over. "You've been sneaking around, meeting with people I don't even know. You could have told me about it. I could have helped you." Caroline stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me. There are powerful people involved, people who would do anything to silence me. I didn't want to drag you into this." "Drag me into what?" Jonathan asked, his voice rising. "You're already dragging me into it by keeping me in the dark." The mysterious man shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "Maybe now is not the time for this," he finally said, scanning the lobby. "You're both in danger if they find out you're onto them. Caroline, we need to go." "What do you mean, danger?" Jonathan asked, his heart pounding. The gravity of the situation began to settle in, and he felt sick with dread. He had never considered the possibility that Caroline's work could put her in harm's way, or that he might be implicated in it. "I'll explain everything," Caroline said, her tone urgent. "But we don't have time. They're watching, and we need to leave." Jonathan felt a rush of conflicting emotions, his protective instincts flaring. "You're not going anywhere without me," he insisted, standing his ground. "If you're in danger, I'm in danger too. We're in this together." Caroline's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Jonathan saw the vulnerability behind her fierce determination. "I appreciate that, but this is about more than just us. There are lives at stake." "Then let me help," he urged, his voice steadying. "I don't want to be left out anymore. I want to understand." Just then, the tension in the air shifted, replaced by a loud commotion as a group of men stormed into the lobby. They were sharply dressed, but there was an edge to their demeanor that sent chills down Jonathan's spine. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the room with predatory intent. "Caroline!" one of the men shouted, his voice echoing in the vast space. "We know you're here. It's time to come out and play." Jonathan's blood ran cold as he realized the men were here for her. "What do they want?" he asked, panic rising in his chest. Caroline's face paled, and she instinctively stepped closer to Jonathan. "They're the ones I've been investigating. They can't know I'm onto them." "Then we need to move now," Jonathan insisted, grabbing her arm. "We can't just stand here." But before they could make a decision, the men approached, their intentions clear. "You think you can just walk away from this, Caroline?" one of them sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. You've been a thorn in our side for too long. Jonathan felt his heart pound as he positioned himself between Caroline and the men, instinctively protective. You'll have to go through me first, he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. The lead man laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Oh, look at the little rich boy playing hero. You really have no idea what you're getting into, do you? Jonathan's mind raced. He had spent so long wrapped in the luxury of his life, oblivious to the darker realities that lay beneath the surface. I don't care what you think, he shot back, his voice steadier than he felt. She's not afraid of you, and neither am I. Caroline's hand tightened around Jonathan's wrist, and he glanced back at her. There was a fierce determination in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, and in that moment, he understood the depth of her strength. She had been fighting battles he had never imagined. Let's go, she said, her voice low but resolute. With that, they turned to flee, but the men moved to block their path. Jonathan felt a surge of adrenaline as he prepared to fight for Caroline, for their future, for the love that had brought them to this point. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't turn back now. As they pushed through the chaos, Jonathan realized that this was a moment that would forever change them. The life he had known, the comfortable illusions he had maintained, were crumbling around him. And in their place stood the harsh reality of love, loyalty, and the dangers of truth. Stay close to me, he whispered to Caroline as they maneuvered through the lobby. The world outside awaited them, full of uncertainty and peril, but together, they would face whatever came next, together, as partners in a fight that had only just begun.